Today, we're going to be building a language learning assistant based on OpenAI. So the project is going to be a little bit different because I'll be sharing a lot my thought process behind the different things that need to be accomplished and how I'm thinking about it. So we're going to go first through GPT prompting and how to get the correct response that we're looking for. And then later, we're going to implement basically this response to create these different prompts for the user where they can learn the language. So yeah, let me first guide you through the webflow build, and then later we're going to see what is it that we need to get from ChatGPT, and then how are we going to get this information. So the idea behind it is that we have a multi-step form here, and that we have 10 steps. Now, of course, we could change these modules, these language learning modules, as we want later on, but that's the general idea behind it. So for now, we're just having one simple exercise that we're getting from ChatGPT, but if we wanted to create different exercises, we can, of course, expand on this functionality and add more logic, such as using their text-to-speech model and vice versa as well, so that the user speaks into the microphone and we are sending that to OpenAI for review. We could do all this type of stuff, but for now, I want to start with a simple example, which we can use as a foundation. So here, the idea is that we get a sentence. For example, he does not have his shoes. And then we would get basically a list of words here in Spanish, and we have to assemble them in the correct order, add them here to the tag, and then submit to go to the next step. And when we submit the form, then we're going to get an answer whether our sentence was correct or not. So for example, once we get the data, we would have here multiple words. For example, in this button, we have L, and then this tag would have maybe zapatos. Here we would have no, and so on and so forth. And whenever the user clicks here on any of the words, we want to add the word here to the input. And of course, when someone clicks here on the button that's being added to the input, we want to add this. We want to remove it from the input, and we want to add this tag back here to the word list. So yeah, I created this simple feature that I'm planning to build. And the first thing I need to do here is think about the structure that I need from any backend. So in this case here, we have a multi-step form. We are getting 10 different steps. So we can think that, okay, we need to get basically an array with 10 different steps. And inside of that, we need to have two things. We need to have the sentence that's going to be written in English here, which is the prompt for the user. And then we have the second sentence here that's going to be written in Spanish. But we also have these tags here. And these tags, we can think of it, the data structure, as being just basically an array of strings that are contained in a sentence. So we don't need to really get an array from the backend. We can get a regular sentence and then just break it down into its constituent parts, like the words here. Okay, so yeah, we just basically need to get the English sentence and get the Spanish sentence, and then we can break the sentences down and create an array out of it. And yeah, that would be it. So let's jump over to ChatGPT and let's try to prompt GPT to get us the correct data structure. Okay, so I already created this prompt before, so I'm not going to probably use whatever I create here right now. I'm going to use what I created before because it worked well when I was testing it out. But just to show you my thought process, I'm going to talk how I think about it. So first of all, we said we need to have a data structure where we have an array like this. And inside of it, we need to have objects like so. Each object needs to have two things. So we need to have the English sentence and then below it, we need to have the Spanish sentence. So that's the structure that we're looking for. So we can ask ChatGPT to create an array for us with that structure. So let's add here our prompt, and we're going to write the following. Create simple sentences in English. Oh. And add a Spanish translation below it. And then we can write also which sort of response we need. So we can write here the response should be in JSON format. And it should follow this structure. And here we're going to write brackets, and we're going to write your sentence goes here. Okay. Perfect. And let's see what we get. And nice, that's pretty much exactly what we are looking for. Now, of course, we can make sure that we're getting 10 items, just like we said before. So we're going to change our prompt and write that we need 10 items. Okay, now we can save and submit it. Cool. And if we would need, let's say, intermediate or advanced sentences, we would just change the prompting basically to not use simple sentences, but use advanced sentences. Okay. Cool. Now, this prompt is pretty good. We can keep it as it is, and we can go and implement this in Wized so that we get the data not through ChatGPT here, but instead through the OpenAI API. Okay, cool. So here I already added the base URL for it. This you can find in the API documentation from OpenAI. So what we're looking here is text generation. And we can see this example over here. So in this curl request, we can see here that at the top, we have the base URL, which is this part of the URL. And then we have the completions endpoint, which is the endpoint we're looking for. Completions is used for ChatGPT-like interfaces, basically. So we can use this, and then I'm going to show you a couple of more interesting properties that we can add here in order to get what we're looking for. So if we look at the example over here, we can see here that we have multiple roles here. So role system, content, you are a helpful assistant. Role user, who won the World Series in 2020. And then we have role assistant. That's the response. The Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series in 2020. And then the user can ask another question. So we will need to submit the system prompt. We are going to write to ChatGPT that it's a language learning assistant. And then we're going to add basically our prompt here. And we are also going to use some advanced prompts so that we make sure that we're getting the JSON response. Okay, so we have our base URL, and now we're going to create our request. So here we're going to write create user prompt or create sentences. Under apps, we're going to choose OpenAI. And here we're going to write return completions. Under method, we're going to choose post. And now we need to add headers here. The first header is going to be authorization. So once we add this header, we can add our API token. And if you don't have an API token yet, you can create a free account on openai.com, and you will need to submit your card for it. So if you want to build any sort of assistant like this, you need to at least upload a couple of dollars, add a couple of dollars to your account, so that you can use those credits when prompting the OpenAI backend. So I have my authorization token already in place. I have it here. And here I'm going to paste it in. Return. And I'll paste my API key in. And just to make sure, whenever you have this authorization key here, in most cases, you don't just paste your API key like this, but instead you write here bearer and then space and then your API key. Okay, now that we have the token in place, let's add another key value pair here to the header, which is going to be content type. And here we're going to write application JSON. Like so. And now we can add our key value pairs to the body. So we can look back at the docs. And we can see here what we need. So we need model, we need messages, and since we're going to get a JSON, we can look at JSON mode. So here we have an example that has a third key value pair in the body, which is response format type JSON object. So we'll just use the same model here. Like so. And then the next key we had was response format. And we're going to copy all of this because we need to make sure that we're pasting in the object just like we have it here. Okay. And now we need to add our messages. And this is going to be an array. So you can see here in this example that we have an array and then we have objects. We have role, system, and then the content, and then we have another role and more content. Now, since our prompt is a little bit long, there's going to be a special way of inserting it, and I'm going to show it to you in a second. Return, and I'll paste this in. And in Wized, you can also right-click and format the document to get it nicely linted. Perfect. Now here, we're going to change this prompt and we're going to write our prompt, which is going to be, you are a helpful language learning assistant. Okay, like so. And here, we're going to add our prompt. So we're going to go back to ChatGPT. And we can just copy whatever we had here. Since the response was good enough, there's no need to change it. So I'm going to copy this. I'll go back here. And what I want to do now is insert that inside of this string that the user is sending to ChatGPT. So if I just paste this in here, this will not work. You can see here that it gets very messy. And if I would try to run it, it wouldn't work. We would get some errors. So what we have to do here is remove these double quotation marks and instead use template literals. So the template literals are basically two backticks next to each other. And inside of that, we want to paste our content. And here we have it. Now we can try to run this and see what we get. Okay, so we are getting an array just like we should. And let's send our request and let's see if we get the correct response. Cool, and we can see here that the request was successful and that we got a response. And we can see here that we have an array sentences and we have all the sentences inside. Cool. Now, there's one thing that you can do. It might not be necessary, but just to make sure that this first word is always the same whenever we get a response, let's change the structure that we are requesting and write that we want the first property to be called data. Because sometimes I noticed that ChatGPT responds with data, sometimes with sentences, and if you build your logic and you use a certain word, it will break the logic. So we want to make sure that the response is staying consistent. So what we're going to do here is write data, and then we have our array inside. Okay? And now we can see when we run this request again, our content is going to have data as the first property. And then we have English sentence, I like to read books, Spanish sentence, Me gusta leer libros. Okay, perfect. Now, what we have to do is take the response and turn it into an array. So instead of having to reference this field every single time, let's turn this into a computed variable. So we are referencing only the properties that are inside of data. So we're going to go here to variables. And here I created already an array variable, which is responsible for generating this multi-step form. This is something that I already covered in other tutorials, how to make a multi-step form. So I'm not going to cover it here, but just know that the logic for the multi-step form has been already in place. So yeah, if you're interested in that, we're going to link to the tutorial where I'm showing that. Okay, to go back to our array, what we're going to do here is make sure that this is a computed variable. So every time when the underlying value is changing, this variable is getting recomputed. And here, we're going to return our field. So we have create sentences here. We have message content, which is this field. And now you can see here, if we press the play button, we are returning this object. Now, we also have to parse this. So what we can do for easier reference is store this in a variable like response equals this response over here, or response array. Okay? And we're going to put this in json.parse so that we extract this data inside here. So here we're going to write json.parse. And our request is going to be, seems like I deleted it, my bad. json.parse. And inside of this json.parse, we want to have our field, which is messaged content. And now we're just going to return the response array. Return response array. There we go. Okay, perfect. And now if we would write, for example, .data, we can see that we get just the array. And we can check also if we can get all the other properties, just to make sure. Perfect. And let's get the English sentence. Cool. Now if we change it to Spanish, we get this. Awesome. Let's delete all of this. We'll just leave it at data, and let's keep that in our variable. Cool. Now if we refresh this page, you're going to see that our form disappears, and that's because it's using this array here as the base. So it renders a list from this array. So we need to make sure that when the page starts loading, we are running our request so that we show this form as soon as it's loaded. Now, in a real application, you would display a loader here, but we're not going to do this right now. So we'll go to the Actions panel. And we're going to call this action submit request. We'll do this on page load. Perform request, create sentences. And now if we refresh our page, once the request finishes, we're going to see our form render. Cool. And we can see here that all of our steps are getting rendered correctly. Now, these forms are empty because we don't have anything yet inside. This is just an empty input field, but we're going to work on that logic later on. So now let's build the actions to structure this prompt correctly. So we're going to go to actions now, and let's first replace this title. So we have the sentence here. We can call the action set sentence. Element sentence, and we're going to choose set text, plain text, return, and now here we're going to select our English sentence. So we have to select our array. We're going to write here v.I, because this is going to be dynamically set, dot English sentence. Cool. Let's refresh our canvas. Perfect. And we have I like to read books. Awesome. Now with the Spanish sentence, we want to break it down into individual words. So we're going to create a variable for that. I created it already and I called it tags initial. And we're going to get the value from v.array. Now, of course, it also needs to be for the current element. So we're going to use v.I. And here we're going to write Spanish sentence dot split. And we're going to split the words with a space. Perfect. And here we have the individual words. Now, what we need to do here is also shuffle the array. So we don't want to render here basically the words in the same order that they are, but instead we want to make it more difficult for the user. So I'm going to just look up quickly how to shuffle up an array. There's probably a method for it. Perfect. And we can just use this logic over here. So let's first of all store our array in a variable so that it becomes easier to work with. So we're going to write here const Spanish sentence equals this value. Or Spanish array. We can use Spanish array here. Okay? Then here, we're going to paste in this function that shuffles an array. And what we're going to do here is just apply the function and pass into the function as an argument our array. So here we're going to write return shuffle Spanish array. And that should work. No, it doesn't. Okay, let's see. Let's see first if we're getting Spanish array correctly. Yes, we are. Perfect. Array.length. Okay. This should be good. So I created a variable. I'll try to store it first in a variable. Okay. And let's try to return that. Shuffled, like so. Okay, let me see if I missed something. Oh, okay, so it's actually shuffling the real array. So we are returning basically the wrong value. So what we need to do is just shuffle the array, like so. And then we're going to return the original array because it has been shuffled. Okay, perfect. So now we have the array shuffled. Okay. And now what we need to do is render the list of tags here from this array. So we have to look for our tag initial button. And we're going to call it render initial tags. Okay. Under element, we're going to choose our tag initial element. And here, we're just going to render a list. So we're going to render our list from the tag's initial variable. That's the variable that we just created. Okay, we can see here that we get null. Okay. And variable for index, we can create a new one. So we're going to call it j, and we're going to return 0. Okay, and let's refresh the page and let's see if this is working. Okay, so we are rendering a list, and we have to now also replace the text inside. Since it's the same element, we can add 2 actions to the same element. So we're going to also choose set text, plain text, return, text initial, and we're going to write v.j, like so. Cool. Okay, now we have to refresh it again in order to see what has been done. And you can see here that we have the sentences. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to move each word whenever it's clicked into this other array over here. So first of all, in order to do that, we need to render a list of items over here so that whenever we add items to that array, it's immediately going to be reactive and the word is going to be displayed here. So we can just duplicate this functionality here and then just replace the values because it's going to be pretty much the same thing. So I'll call it set initial tags instead because we're rendering and setting the text as well. Okay? And I'll just duplicate this and I'll call it set final tags. Perfect. Now here under attribute, we're going to choose tag final. which is this element over here. I also created a tags final variable, which is for now just empty. And yeah, this is all there is to it. So here we're going to write set tags final. And we can use the same v.j variable here. Okay, if we refresh this, we should get the upper array displayed as empty, and the lower one should have words. Okay, there seems to be a small issue with the spacing now that we removed the word, but we can take care of that afterwards. So in Webflow, we could add a minimal height to the parent container, and then this jumping wouldn't happen, but we can take care of that later. Okay, and now what we have to do is make sure that whenever a word is clicked, we are removing it from this array and pushing it into the other array. So for that, we're going to use a run function. So we can go back to our set initial tags and change the name and write handle initial tags. Because we are rendering the list here, setting the text, and now we're going to also add an event handler. So on event, click, action, run function. And here we're going to write our function. So we need to do two things here. First of all, we need to push the current value into the tags final array. So we're going to write here v.tags final dot push. And we could even use the trigger data here. So we can just write t.node. I think this should work. So we can just try that out quickly. Let me just refresh the canvas first. Okay, so we are not just pushing the text, we're pushing the whole node. That's why we get this messy input here. So we need to change that. So we'll go to our logic, handle initial tags, and we won't be pushing the node, but instead we're going to go here to node.innerText. Let's try this again. Whenever you're dealing with these computed variables and so on, then you have to refresh the canvas. And there we go. We can now push the words here, but we are not deleting them from here because we want to basically move it out of one layer into the other. So I believe we need to use the pop method, but I'll just check quickly if that's correct. Okay, dot splice, and then we can use the value, I believe. So splice uses the index. That should be fine. So the first value is the index. The second is the number of items that we want to move. Okay. So let's go back to our run function and let's change this. So here we're going to go then to initial tags dot splice. And we can use our index variable. So we're going to write here v.j. And we want to only remove one item, so we're going to have 1 as the second value. Because the splice method takes in an index as the first value and the number of items as a second value. I don't know if you can actually get a description of a method if you just start typing it and hover over it? No, unfortunately not. Okay, perfect. And let's see this in action now. We'll refresh our page. Cool. Nice. And we can move our words, our tags, into the input above. Now, what we want to do here is that if the user makes a mistake, we can remove a word also by clicking on it. So here, we're also going to replace this name with handle final tags. Here, we'll add a run function as well. On event, click. Run function. Oh, and one thing to mention. In the build, I'm using buttons here. So there's one small thing you have to be careful of, and that's the following. So whenever you have buttons, which are native HTML buttons, if they're in a form, they will just submit the form whenever you click on them. But if you want to avoid this behavior, you have to add type equals button here, and this regular submit button will have type equals submit. So this way, the forms will not get automatically submitted whenever you click on any button that's within the form. Just something to be aware of because it can easily happen. Okay, let's get back to our run function. So handle final tags will do basically the same thing that we're doing there, but we'll just invert our logic. So here we're going to write v.tagsinitial.push t.node.innerText, not inner HTML, but inner text. And then we're going to remove it from tags final. .splice again. And here we're going to use the index first, and then the number of items that we want to remove as the second argument. Okay? Cool. Let's refresh our page and let's see what we get. Okay. Nice. So now we can move the words back and forth. Awesome. Now, the next functionality that we're going to be building is comparing the words that have been added to the final array with the initial string being just split. So they have to match. If we have a mismatch, then the user did not select the correct answer. So we have to display here either an error or that the answers were correct. So the way I structured this in Webflow is as follows. We have here the answer component, which is just a text block. And inside of that text block, you can see here, if I go to style, we have is wrong. And if I remove this class, it's correct. So we are adding the is wrong class to style the answer component. So we'll be setting the text for the answer component, and we'll set the class as well. But first, let's make the comparison for the wrong and correct answers. So here we have already a multi-step form, and whenever the next button is clicked, we're going to the next step. So by default, the form gets submitted and we go to the next step immediately. Now later, we have to also make sure that we are displaying the words for the correct step, but we'll take care of that afterwards. So the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to check whenever the form is trying to be submitted, whether the user input is matching the base string. So let's go to our increment counter action. We are preventing the default, and we want to make this a conditional. And the condition is going to be the user setting a correct answer. Now, in Duolingo, it works a bit differently. If you make a wrong answer, you go to the next step, and then this card gets added to the end. We could build that in a later stream if you want to, but for now, let's just keep it simple. And we have to force the user to correct their answer before they can proceed. So here, the conditional is going to be that the Spanish sentence, when it's split, equals tags final. So we can write here v.array, v.I, because it has to be for each step. And here we're going to write dot Spanish sentence, dot split, with a space like this. Okay, return. Now, we cannot do this, but I'm going to make the error on purpose because this is something that a lot of users struggle with. So whenever you compare two different arrays, it's always going to be false, no matter if the arrays have the same values or not. So if we just write here equals, tags final, you're going to see false, of course. But even if the values would be the same, it's going to be false. So you can see here, if I just try to run this, me gusta leer libros, okay? And let's set the final array in the same order. Like this. Okay, where did this disappear now? Okay, but we have it in the final tags. We are probably having an issue here in the interface because I've been moving through different parts and different functions. Okay, we'll go to increment counter. And now if we compare it, we're going to see false, although the values are exactly the same. You can see here like this or like this, the values are the same. So to compare array values, you can see here that the same thing that I just explained. And yeah, we can just convert it to strings, basically. Okay, so for sake of simplicity, let's add a variable that stores our initial sentence. Like this. We can stringify that. Stringify. Like so. And then user reply. Equals JSON.stringify, and we're going to use here the final reply. And now we can compare these values. User reply equals initial sentence. And now we see true. And if we refresh it and we have a wrong answer, it's going to be false. Okay, now I purposefully set this sentence up in the wrong way, and we should get false there. So let's check our increment counter, run function. If we try to run this, we have false. And let's correct it quickly. Okay, and now we should be able to go to the next step. In our second session, we can continue building this and also show to the user at the end how many answers they got correct, and also how to display whether the answer was correct or wrong right here. Now, in the next session, we could also build a text-to-speech module where we are using AI to read out aloud the sentences in Spanish, and then the user has to write down what they heard, basically. Thanks everyone for building along. In today's session, we learned how to build a language learning module with ChatGPT and Wized, and in the next session, we are going to continue building on it, finalize the form, learn also how to display correct and wrong answers, and we're going to also implement a text-to-speech module as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.